being in Tibet 3 times in my life, I've seen situations firsthand. People are being watched over every single moment of their lives. They are not allowed to practice their religion and their culture freely. They are not allowed to teach in the monasteries there until they go through a series of Holiness re-education. Nothing is permanent. The good times will have to end. The bad times also would have to end. But His Holiness have took upon himself the weight of Buddhism and to teach around the world, where the institution, whether it has to remain or not, it still depends on the Tibetan people. That please, I have something for you. Please take it out of Tibet. So then he took out a casket, and then it enshrined the bone relic of the Buddha.
Unsilenced, Voices of Young Tibetans is a podcast presented by the Foundation for Nonviolent Alternatives, where young Tibetans share their personal stories, experiences, opinions, and journey in exile.
Namaste, and welcome to our FNVA podcast, Unsilenced, Voices of Young Tibetans. Today we are blessed and privileged and even fortunate to have with us His Eminence, the 9th Kunsang Dorjie Rinpoche. Rinpoche is a Buddhist teacher, a Tibetan astrologer, and an architect. At the age of 2, he was recognized as the reincarnation of the previous Kunsang Dorjie Rinpoche. Rinpoche La has completed 3-year retreat and upholds the responsibility of his lineage to spread Buddhism throughout the world and inspire people. Rinpoche La continues to do his work through his various centers throughout the world, including Singapore, Nepal, and India, notably. Rinpoche also returned and visited Tibet 3 times to receive teachings and empowerment so as to continue his lineage. During the COVID pandemic, Rinpoche voluntarily initiated various vaccination drives that helped many Tibetans in New Delhi, including myself, and continues various charity work. Most recently, during the holiest month of the Tibetan calendar, the Sakadawa, Rinpoche La kindly venerated the holy relics of Lord Buddha and his 2 disciples at the World Buddhist Center in the presence of respected Srimati Rinpoche Hamula, the Buddhist member of the National Commission for Minorities of the Government of India. So on that note, I and the whole team at FNVA humbly welcome Rinpoche to our podcast.
Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Rinpoche La. So Rinpoche La, the first question that we would like to put upon you is, what is your view on the current state of Buddhism, and what exactly is Buddhism in general?
So Buddhism, as you might know, it's one of the fastest growing religion in the world today, especially in the West. Many people from different walks of life have been intrigued by the teachings of the Buddha. They tend to seek answers from their daily lives through the teachings of the Buddha himself. So many people seek things like what's the cause of suffering? What's the antidote towards the suffering that we are all going through in the samsaric cycle? So many doctors, scientists, even actors and famous personalities, they have all turned towards Buddhism, and they have themselves find some truth or find some answers in their own lives through the teachings of the Buddha. Buddhism in a nutshell, it's about the view of dependent arising and interdependency, where we exist on the basis of interdependency, where I exist because you exist, and you exist because I exist. So we should be practicing loving kindness and compassion towards each other, practicing oneness in the world with 7 billion human beings, and practicing the teachings of ahimsa and karuna.
Indeed, Rinpoche, you definitely shed much light on what Buddhism is in general. But I myself, being from a Tibetan family and being brought up in a Buddhist family for that matter, like we have our own Tibetan tradition of Buddhism, right, Rinpoche? So what I observe is that this very tradition, the Tibetan tradition of Buddhism, has various followers throughout the world, especially in the Himalayan belt region. So Rinpoche La, what exactly is Tibetan Buddhism, and how did Buddhism in the first place come to Tibet?
So So Buddhism flourished 1,200 years ago in Tibet and in the high mountains of the Himalayan region at the time. There was no place called Tibet and Nepal and India, and at that time it was all small kingdoms and stuff. So Buddhism was the lifeblood of the nation at the time. After 1959, everything started changing with the Cultural Revolution that had happened, and Buddhism was becoming illegal and was actually named that religion is poison. So therefore, anyone practicing Buddhism was actually like brainwashed into like Buddhism is a poison that would poison your mind, and you need the liberation from the Chinese Liberation Army. Um, but still, a lot of Tibetan masters were produced in that holy land of Tibet because of their faith and devotion towards the Buddha Dharma and to the teachings and the blessings of the lineage of the Buddha from the Nalanda tradition. So the teachings of the Buddha consist of three different vehicles: the Hinayana, or you call the Theravada, and the Mahayana, which we call the greater vehicle, and also the Vajrayana, which consists of Tantras. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition is more focused towards the Mahayana tradition, where we talk about the Bodhisattva vows, where Bodhicitta is the main teachings. So, and together with the tantric practices, which was introduced by the great master Padmasambhava. So this is how the Tibetan Buddhism was being established. And through that, we have four major sects of the Tibetan Buddhist lineage. Firstly, the Nyingma school, which is the older tradition, the older translation, we would say. Then after that, towards the Kaju, which is the lineage of the Karmapas, and also to the Sakyapas, and then to the most recent, the Gelugpa lineage, which the Dalai Lama is from. So these four lineages, they teach the Buddha Dharma in different methods and ways that could adapt to people from different ways of life and different local traditions. So they all teach the same teachings of Buddha, which would guide one towards enlightenment. So like in the Nyingma, they teach the Dzogchen, which we call Dzogchen, Dzogpa Chenpo. In the Sakya, they teach the teachings of Lamde. In the Kaju, they teach Mahamudra, and in the Gelug, they teach Namrim Chemo. So these are all the teachings that would bring one towards liberation, but just being taught in different ways and methods.
So basically, even though Rinpoche, Tibetan Buddhism has these various sects, at the end of the day, the goal is the same: to achieve enlightenment, to help others. And on that note, Rinpoche, yourself being a very renowned Buddhist practitioner for that matter, like you've been traveling around the world, explaining and sharing the benefits of Buddhism and explaining what Buddhism is for that matter. And you've been to Ladakh. I mean, not only last year, but through a lot of occasions, and you're also planning to visit Ladakh again this year. So when you visited Ladakh last year, like especially when you met the Buddhist practitioners there, and even the lay people of Ladakh, what did you feel while interacting with them?
So I went to Ladakh. My first trip to Ladakh was host a health camp to actually offer medical camp and treatment, not treatments, rather tests. And these tests would actually detect the bacteria which would cause cancer. And if the bacteria being detected, they are being offered a 14-day course of medication to kill the bacteria that's in the body that would advance into cancer in future if it's not taken care of. Secondly, the people of Ladakh have really much devotion and faith towards the Buddha Dharma, because in the Buddhist, they adapting the Tibetan culture and the Buddhist culture. It has been very closely linked with the teachings of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and the way they welcome His Holiness to Ladakh was very heartwarming for me, because when I was there, I seen they took all the setups. They make the arrival of His Holiness so grand, and they clean up the whole place with all these flowers and all these decorations. It really warmed my heart seeing this, and it's my wish and aspiration that we Tibetans could do the same one day in Lhasa, in front of the Potala, where it's the home of the Dalai Lamas. And also with the recent allegations and defamations by different media and personalities, the Ladakh people as a whole have actually stood up against the defamation against His Holiness, and stood with support. So that was really, really nice of them to do that.
Indeed, Rinpoche, and the moving a bit about Buddhism and its origin, which is India. So India, basically, if we talk through the history of annals, it basically has it's debatable, but people generally talk about how it has four major impacts and phenomenon, namely the Vedas, Buddhism, Islam, and Western imperialism. So there was a time when Buddhism was flourishing, but right now people point out how the Buddhism then is not comparable with the Buddhism now. So what is your observation on that, Rinpoche?
So I think the focus of materialism and materialistic desires are more today than in the past. Today we have Facebook, we have iPhones, we have fancy cars, and
We have iPads.
yeah, we have things that really, a lot of things that we want more than what we need. Actually, in those days, it's more to things that they need rather than what they want. But today, I think with more distractions in the world, and also a lot of mental stress, because you have to work to support your own life. So also as a Buddhist, we teach the teachings of impermanence. Nothing is nothing is permanent. The good times will have to end. The bad times also would have to end, because in Buddhism, we see things as nothing. There was no beginning, there was no end, and there's nothing that would last forever. So Buddhism once flourished in India, in Tibet, but there was a time that it degenerated. And also, from today's view, I think Buddhism is again flourishing, especially in the West. I think Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama has a great part to play in the flourishing of the Dharma and around the world. I think I think kinder than the Buddha himself. The Buddha was only able to teach in India and the countries around, but His Holiness have took upon himself the weight of Buddhism and to teach around the world. Even with his age, he's still teaching to all different countries and to different people. So I think His Holiness really is a representation of what the Buddha Dharma is. And also, Buddhism is not about blind faith and something where you should believe me and I'm the only way, but rather Buddhism is a psychology of a way of life. And Buddha himself said that do not believe in my teachings, but rather investigate whether the teachings is beneficial to oneself or others. Like as a goldsmith would actually test gold, if it's 24 karat or is it a Sunday market gold. So just as a goldsmith would test gold by firing the gold and rubbing the gold, so you should investigate the teachings of the Buddha the same way, and to see if it's much beneficial to yourself and to others.
Indeed, Rinpoche, your wisdom on this topic of how Buddhism and its philosophy of impermanence applies to how we cannot compare definitely sheds a lot of wisdom on it. And since you brought the name of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, we all know that, and even the world recognize how he is the shining example and the leader among the Buddhist community. But of late, there has been a lot of talk, in particular, about the process of his reincarnation, especially after he attains parinirvana. What is your thought on that, Rinpoche? And on top of this, what is your thought on the process of emanation as the process of reincarnation? Because recently, the famed Tibetologist Claude RP had written an article stating how emanation is the way forward when it comes to selecting the next reincarnation of His Holiness.
So, firstly, on the topic of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I think I'm no one to actually talk about his reincarnation, because they, as higher beings, they would choose what's most beneficial for the people and the situation at the time. But if I need to speak about this issue, I think His Holiness have always said that the institute of the Dalai Lamas would be dependent on the 6 million Tibetans, because he himself is the body, speech, and mind of Chirizig, which is the guardian deity of Tibet. Therefore, his institute, whether it has to remain or not, it still depends on the Tibetan people. Going back onto the reincarnation process, in Tibet there are different ways to recognize reincarnations. Firstly, it's by reincarnation by birth. So when someone passes away, the closest disciple would look for signs and ask to different masters about the reincarnation of the next child. Whether is he the unmistaken reincarnation of the previous master? Does he have the same attainment, the body, speech, and mind, the merit of the previous teacher? Secondly, we have the reincarnation, where we call the 5 different manifestations. So some teachers can choose to reincarnate or manifest their body, speech, mind, activity, and merits. So a single teacher can have 5 emanations. So they can reincarnate into 5 different bodies.
And is there an example of such a being?
Yeah, there's a great master, Rime master, Jamakense Hongbo. He reincarnated into 5 different manifestations. So the third method of succession is by emanation, as like you have said. In Tibetan, we call it the Madetugu. Madetugu literally translates into reincarnation before death. But what contradicts here is reincarnation is actually after death. You need to be dead before you can reincarnate into another person. But through special circumstances, these higher beings, they would have taken different steps and measures to make sure that the successor would be someone who is of beneficial to the situation and to the people at the time. So I think there are some examples, like in the Drikung monastery. There's a Tugu who have actually passed on his to his own son, because seeing that his son has attained the same level of attainment of his practice, so he has recognized that he should be my next successor, rather than opting to be reincarnated as a Tugu. So this is the third way of recognizing a next successor.
So indeed, Rinpoche, you definitely shed much light on this whole confusion of emanation, which is much talked about these days. And moving on, Rinpoche, I think all of us are aware of it, about the situation of Buddhism inside Tibet since the illegal occupation by the People's Republic of China. It has been deteriorating each day in our very eyes. For example, we have Order Number 5, which certifies Rinpoche and Tukus by the Communist Party of China, even though they tend to believe that they are atheists, they don't believe religion, but they certify such Buddhist lamas. On top of this, we also have them banning Buddhist teaching on popular social media apps, crackdowns on various Buddhist institutions, namely Harungal, Traco County, and also targeting several Buddhist leaders, which eventually pushed them to commit self-immolation. On top of all this, we have the 11th Pension Rinpoche, who is of a similar age to you, Rinpoche. He, along with his family, has been abducted by the CCP in 1995, and since then we know nothing about his whereabouts. So, in such a context, how do you see the situation of Buddhism inside occupied Tibet?
So the situation in Tibet remains very oppressed. Me myself, being in Tibet 3 times in my life, I've seen situations firsthand. People are being watched over every single moment of their lives. Um, they are not allowed to practice their religion and their culture freely. Even today, they are not allowed to study uh, their own language in the schools. So modern education like science, mathematics, and histories are all being taught in Chinese Mandarin rather than Tibetan language itself. So these are some sorts of oppression that the Communist Party of China has infused in the Tibetan communities. And a lot of Tibetan lamas who have came into exile, who have done their studies and have gone back to Tibet, they are not allowed to teach in the monasteries there until they go through a series of communist re-education where they are being forced to sign a certain contract where you're not allowed to talk about politics, you're not allowed to talk about the teachings of His Holiness and things like that. Um, even though the harsh treatments or the orders by the Chinese government, there are still a lot of teachers that actually take the risk, risking their own lives. They might be sent to prisons or they might be put into prison camps and stuff like that. But there are still a lot of teachers who still outrightly teach the Dharma and risking their own life to preserve the teachings of the Dharma, which is what the Tibetans are proud of to have. Because in Tibet, the only thing we have left is our culture and the Buddha Dharma. And on the topic of His Holiness the Vaccination Rinpoche, since 1995, his disappearance has been a worldwide news issue as the youngest political prisoner till date. Um, and in turn, the Chinese CCP government have made a puppet Panchen Lama, which was recognized in a very contradictory way, because to choose a reincarnation, you need to be tested with different methods. Whether this boy is the real reincarnation, whether does he recognize his previous lives, personal items and stuff like that, and through many signs and divinations. But the Chinese government has used methods like golden urn, where you put names of candidates inside the urn and you're supposed to shake it and pick out like a lucky draw. See, so I don't think this is the way where how reincarnation actually works.
Basically, so they've made a joke out of it.
Yes, yes. So, and even recently in Tibet, the puppet pension was being toured around Tibet, and the Chinese government has been paying 100 yuan, which is 14 US dollars, to allow to make Tibetans receive blessings from him. See, so I think these are all just tactics by the CCP government to actually use a puppet to control the Tibetan people with the backing of the Chinese government.
Indeed, Rinpoche, you definitely shed much light about the situation of Buddhism inside Tibet and how grim it is. And the very example of the Chinese puppet pension Rinpoche having to, sort of pay people to receive his blessing, sort of gives a fair bit of idea about how the situation of Buddhism inside is right now. So Rinpoche, now since we've explored how Buddhism is inside occupied Tibet, I would like to dwell upon the status of Tibetan Buddhism in our diaspora and what are the major challenges one faces here.
So I think we as exiled people, we are living in a free country in India, we are very grateful to India to host us and host His Holiness for so many years. So we are very grateful to our host country, India. And His Holiness being exiled might not be a bad thing here, because in the olden times, when His Holiness was only in Tibet, Buddhism, he could only teach Buddhism in Tibet itself. But since 1959, when he took exile in India, and through that traveled to so many countries to teach and propagate the Buddha Dharma, so to spread the teachings. Tibet, we have only the teachings of the Buddha that remain really dearly to us, our only assets of Tibetan people is the Dharma that has been taught and has been brought by the many Tibetan kings in the past. So Buddhism is flourishing around the world through the hard work of His Holiness, even though we do not have a country. But I think there are three things that cannot be hidden. One is the sun, one is the moon, and the third thing is the truth. So His Holiness has always taught that whatever you do, you have to be truthful to yourself, and always live a life with peace and loving compassion towards others, all sentient beings. As a Buddhist, sentient beings are like our mother. All mothers has been kind to us, so we do not harm our own mothers, just as we do not harm other sentient beings.
So, Rinpoche, definitely, the Tibetan tradition of Buddhism has been flourishing since we came to exile under the guidance of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama and many other several Buddhist leaders of Tibetan heritage. And Rinpoche yourself is one of them, and you have taken various initiatives in helping our Tibetan community and the Sangha community as a whole, including giving COVID vaccination drives and the recent announcement regarding scholarships to Tibetan students. And I myself have been a recipient of the COVID vaccination drive myself. So, Rinpoche, what inspires you to undertake such initiatives?
I think as a Buddhist myself, and through the teachings of His Holiness, spreading loving kindness and compassion is number one. His Holiness always teaches about, if you cannot benefit others, at least do not harm others, right? So me, just being a simple practitioner, I might not be of much help towards others, but with whatever I can do, I try to benefit others that can in turn help more people. So our scholarship has been going on for the past 2 years. We have now offered grants and scholarship to more than 18 students. So on the COVID, during the time where we were all in lockdown, I was feeling very helpless. So I thought that there was a lot of people dying, and there should be something that we as Buddhists could offer. So Buddhists always talks about saving lives. We giving up meat and saving lives and doing that liberation of animals and stuff like that. But I thought that the best liberation was saving lives through vaccination, where these medicines and these vaccines could save a lot of lives. So, as like I said, all sentient beings are like our mothers. So, offering our own mothers the vaccination, which would save their lives, I think this is my part. Something that I could do for people. Yeah.
So, Rinpoche, before wrapping things up, you've been kind enough to all of us present here to bless us with the holy relics of Lord Buddha. So, Rinpoche, could you tell us the very story behind this relic and how it came into being?
So this precious relic of the Buddha was actually entrusted to me when I was in Tibet. During my last trip to Tibet, this old monk came to my room just before midnight, and he told me that, please, I have something for you, please take it out of Tibet. So then he took out a casket, and then it enshrined the bone relic of the Buddha. This is the holiest sacred relic of the Buddha. The relic was actually entrusted to me by a very old monk. It was hidden during the Cultural Revolution. It was hidden in actually a butter lamp. So there was a big butter lamp in the monastery, and it was hidden for I think more than 20 years inside the butter. So at that time, no one remembered about this until when things became a little bit better in Tibet. Situation became better. This old monk, he remembered about this precious relic, and he cleaned up all the butter and actually took out this relic and then installed it in this casket. So the history of this relic is Atisha. After coming back from Indonesia, he actually was circumambulating the Mahabuddha Stupa in Bodh Gaya, present-day Bihar. And while he was circumambulating the Stupa, there was a Tara statue. So we believe that this Tara was self-emanated from the rock. So this Tara had spoken. So we call the Droma Sunjuma. So the Tara had spoken, saying that it would be very beneficial if you could take a trip to Tibet, or you should go to Tibet to actually revive the Dharma, which was degenerating at the time, because at the time there was a king called Lang Dharma who actually destroyed all the Buddhist teachings, and all the Buddhist masters were being imprisoned and things like that. So Atisha went to Tibet to revive the Buddhist teachings, and he also brought this relic back to Tibet. And from then on, the Kadam lineage, which was the teachings of Atisha himself, the Kadampa tradition, started since then. So this itself is the relic of the Buddha. Till today, you can see it's still multiplying. Yeah, so when I first got it, I was quite a little bit. I think I was not really able to believe that it was the relic of the Buddha, because I was young at that time, number one, and it just seems like another piece of holy object. But to really think that it's a bone of the Buddha would be something unimaginable to receive, to be in contact with such an holy object. So, through many years of my practice and prayers, I could have seen. I've seen the miraculous display where it has been multiplying. I've even sent one piece of the relic to US to do the carbon dating and DNA test. But when the result came back, they could only give me a carbon dating of 2,600 years old, where it coincides with the Buddha's time. But the DNA was there was no results for the DNA, because there was no descendants of the Buddha to match the DNA of the Buddha himself. So therefore, me myself have, with great faith and devotion, have venerated these relics for many years since my last trip to Tibet, and also recently during the Ladakh Molam Chemo in Bodh Gaya. At first, they invited me and said that there was 500 people that's going to gather and pray for world peace. And when I went there were 5,000 people that appeared. So I think the people of Ladakh, their faith and devotion is really deep rooted in their lives. So on that day where the relic was brought to the holy pavilion where we recited prayers, relics, 32 pill relics grew and fall out of the main relic. So when I was talking to my teachers and the other host of the Molam teachings, they just really were inspired and said that the devotion of the Ladakhi people and all the Buddhists alike manifested such miracles. So through this, Buddha wants to show that everyone can be a Buddha. Through faith, devotion, hard work, and practice, everyone can attain their own enlightenment. So there's a book that says enlightenment in the palms of your hands. So whatever you do now could be whatever the cause and the effect of the future. It's all upon yourself. This is a small gift for your organization. Being a organization that practice non-violence and loving kindness and compassion, the statue is of Maitreya, who is the future Buddha. Maitreya means loving kindness. So with this, we hope that you can spread more loving kindness and compassion throughout the world and uphold the teachings of the Buddha.
Thank you so much, Rinpoche. Thank you. So, on this very blessed and auspicious note, I would like to end our session here and would like to quote from your late spiritual master, the late Lama Sopa Rinpoche. Rinpoche, if I may be honored to do that, like live with compassion, work with compassion. Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you.
For more updates and videos by FNVA, click on the link and please subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.